You're listening to Raiding the Fringe with Poda, Ostinius, Nepids, and Dr. Lee. From ancient civilizations to the cutting edge of science, from exploring the outer reaches of space to the Atlantean depths, we discuss the topics of the unknown and the possibilities of the bizarre. Are you hungry to expand your horizons? Come get your fill as we raid the fringe.
Good evening, everyone. This is Ostinius. I'm going to host tonight's episode. With me, as always, is Dr. Lee.
Hello.
Poda.
So,
and Nep.
Hello.
All right, tonight we are going to be discussing young Earth. Originally, when this topic was broached, I was naive enough to think of, Cro-Magnons and dinosaurs and amoebas climbing from the primordial ooze. But obviously, there is a much bigger and deeper subject at hand, and touching on it, I find it quite fascinating. But obviously, there are some people who know more about that than I. Dr. Lee, would you like to head us off?
Yeah, the whole belief of young Earth, it's primarily a religious one. It's a creation versus evolution. Young Earthers generally believe that the Earth was created between 6,000 and 10,000 years ago versus the millions/billions of years that other scientists have determined.
So that's the basis of the idea.
Yeah, that's if our episode was only going to be one sentence long. That was it.
the synopsis, the cliff notes, if you will. All right. So, we have things like carbon dating. Are you saying that kind of stuff is inaccurate or misguided? Or?
There is a huge dispute, carbon dating being one of them. There's a lot of factors that scientists use to determine the age of things. Carbon dating, silt depositing, the actual layers of the crust itself that show us history as you dig deeper. There are geologists out there who disagree with each other as to what the specific layers mean, because it's obvious as you dig, you can see, like the rings of a tree, you go deeper into the Earth's crust, and you can see when things happened and befell.
Dirt, clay,
frozen citizens of Pompeii, Ammonites, like that.
Yeah.
And because of specific events like the burial of Pompeii, and the one layer that is consistent all over the world, the global layer of that meteorite that they believe fell and destroyed all the dinosaurs, that one impacted layer, it shows devastation and all the creatures trapped on a similar layer in that one spot is global. And so that's why they believe that was a global disaster that took out the dinosaurs at once.
Okay, now that's saying that people believe in dinosaurs. What about like the Christian aspect of, kind of non-evolution creationism?
Well, even with creationism, God created dinosaurs.
Yeah, I'm a Christian, and I do believe dinosaurs existed. Like, there is evidence. I don't dispute that.
One of the major disputes is just how far back they go.
Okay, so this cataclysm. Okay, let's say that, there's like a wheel of time, or, time repeats itself, history repeats itself, stuff like that. Like, there was the flood with, like, Jonah and stuff like that. What if, like, that first cataclysm is along those kind of lines that wiped out the dinosaurs? You know what I'm saying?
Well, I think the fact that something wiped out the dinosaurs isn't part of the dispute. It's part of an anchor stone that both sides leap from when they argue their sides. Generally, with the young Earthers, a huge factor of it is Noah's flood, and whether or not the geology actually proves that Noah's flood was global or not.
Well, that's getting into some religious stuff, because there's, like, almost every religion has something of that great flood in their lifetime, but obviously the destruction of the dinosaurs was before human. You know what I mean?
Right, but...
that brings it in, because dinosaurs are supposed to be over 10,000 years old, right?
Yeah, they're supposed to be allegedly growing up in school. They are supposed to be way older than that. Now, this young Earth theory is new to me. I haven't looked into it. I've heard the term. And when it comes to the flood of the Bible, there's also other what is considered ancient civilizations that also make an account of that flood, which is a different argument in itself of, whose flood was better or when it happened, because from a religious standpoint, those would all be after. They would be descendants of Noah's family who wrote about it. But I'm not going to get into that because I don't know names and dates and places. But the dinosaurs being wiped out by a flood, I think, is more prevalent than the theory of a meteorite or something of that nature, because we've had countless archaeological excavations of dinosaurs being covered in the sediment and like instantly, or the vegetation layer of that time being massive because of saying that a giant flood wiped out all these trees and they sank the bottom like they would in a lake. There's a giant vegetation layer that's turned to, what is it, methane or crude oil or
coal. However, when it is due to flooding, the layer below the flood, which winds up being coal, really high carbon level coal, that shows proof that it was rapid, that it was a disaster, that all the animals were killed at once. But if it's not followed by something like shale, where those kind of sediments settle and they fall down there, and that would have to happen after a flood when things settle down. So that would prove whether the difference between a flood versus some other catastrophe that would, knock it out.
So we're not talking meteor anymore.
No, that's what I'm saying is they know that one wasn't a flood.
Oh, right.
But comparing that to the other layers tells them whether or not the flood was global, because you've got, imagine like so many layers of cake. Right. You've got the disaster down here at the bottom.
Tiramisu.
Yeah. Taste the tiramisu, a Neapolitan flavored cake. We got the vanilla and the strawberry, and the more vanilla and the more strawberry. You count how many layers up and how many inches, you know how disastrous it was, how long the disaster took, how many years were basically between those, give or take to a degree. And so what we would be looking for was that coal layer at basically the same degree difference from the initial disaster layer, so we know is in basically the same time frame.
Isn't that how we get the determination of sea level?
Oh, I don't know.
I think that's how we get the determination of sea level.
I would say we just go out to the sea. That's the level, and really.
Well, no, I mean, because if the world is flooded and then there's stuff and there's deeper depths, you're going to have different layers of that cake going into. It's like a cake, and then somebody took a pie slice out. That cake's not there, but you know where that layer should be.
No, I don't know if that's related or not. I don't know. So what geologists are trying to do is they're trying to prove that all of these sites that they have been doing these excavatings have that flood damage at the same point all across the globe to prove whether or not the flood was there.
Right.
And this is only a part of the argument. The next part of the argument is, how long does it take to create a layer? Because these layers of crust, are they proving that, this was 1,000 years, this is 1,000 years, this is 10,000 years, or was this 100 years, 100 years, and 1,000 years?
Well, just like the sea level thing, you're also talking about the base. So we know that the mashing of tectonic plates creates earthquakes, but then we have mountains, and there are long fault lines and what have you. But how long did it take to create that mountain? I mean, obviously, there are earthquakes in LA all the time, but you don't see some random mountain shoot out of somebody's house.
That's true. Through the layers, they have, because of the way things settle within those layers, they have noticed that the polarity of the Earth has been switching. The North and South poles have switched periodically through its history. And through the creation of mountains where the plates ram up against each other, now your levels aren't flat, they're arcing up towards the peak because they're pushing each other upward.
But the same as how much does it take to create a layer, how long does it take to make a mountain?
That is also in dispute. Some say that
Because some are pushing
great
in, and then you've
disasters like a
got stuff
tsunami
like
will do it quickly.
San Andreas Fault, where it's separating. And it's been a long time going.
Well, the Pacific Ocean or the Atlantic Ocean itself is a separation of those plates, and it's just filling in its own gap.
Okay, so I'm gonna wrangle us into the moon thing. So the planet's 10,000 years old. The moon catastrophe before Noah's flood happened, which some scientists say that the asteroid hit the Earth, and that's how the moon was formed. And if there's a young Earth and we observe it leaving our orbit and getting further year by year, why isn't it so far away?
It's more along the lines of, okay, so it's moving at a steady pace. Is that correct?
Right.
So if you go back, and the Earth is supposedly supposed to be millions of years old, right?
Right.
Not according to young Earth, but yeah.
No, what I'm saying, if that's the case. So if the moon is going away from the Earth at a steady rate that we have measured, if you take that and go back to where it basically hits Earth, it's not million and millions of years.
Right, yeah, that's what I'm saying.
But I would argue that the moon's position, when it hit the Earth or whatever, that didn't create the Earth to begin with.
No, we're not saying that. We're saying that basically, I don't know exactly how long it will be from where the moon is now, if you subtract all the time that it moved away, to how many years that would be before it touches Earth. I don't know that calculation off the top of my head. What we're saying is that kind of helps us prove young Earth, because it's not millions and millions of years. It's a shorter amount of time before it does hit Earth. And we don't believe that the world, young Earth people don't believe that the world, basically you use the Bible and it says God created the heavens and the earth. The heavens are the sky, the earth is what we stand on. So when he did that, he created the moon, the stars, the galaxy, the earth, and all that noise like that. So that right there is when everything was stated. So if the moon is moving away, you know what I'm saying, at a distance, then that it just helps prove that the earth isn't the billions of years old that the scientists are telling us.
Well, I'd have to take a closer look at the math before I could form my opinion on that. But I would have to say, with gravitational fields, basically an orbit is nothing more than it moving in a straight line at the same speed that it's falling towards the Earth. So if it's moving slightly away, it means it's moving faster than it's falling, giving it its orbit that slowly leaks away. Now, knowing the math of that, and I know gravity itself is exponential. So as it gets further away from the Earth, the motion's going to change.
Well, you're also talking vacuum or space as a vacuum. So no force besides the other planetary bodies that would give gravity pushing the moon away from them. They're going to suck it towards them. It has nothing to stop its speed, and it would increase. So if there's a force of 1 pound on the moon, and there is no force against that 1 pound pushing it one way, exponentially it'll get faster. So today it's 1 pound. Tomorrow it's 2 pounds. The next day it's 4 pounds. And it will exponentially be tossed out.
I see what you're saying, but that's not exactly how gravitational pulls work as far as planets and orbits.
Unless there's any sort of counteraction against it in the vacuum of space, it will exponentially get faster and faster and faster, because it's always proceeding at that speed, and there's nothing acting against it unless it is another planetary body. So let's say that the moon, we're third rock from the sun. The moon is moving away from us, but maybe it's the tug from the sun that's making it move away. And so as we get older, it moves faster and faster away. I remember when I was a little kid, the moon seemed huge and magical, and I was like, oh my gosh, look at this huge moon. And now I'm an adult, and people are like, a super moon. It's going to be the biggest moon you've ever seen. And I look at it, and I'm like, You know what I mean?
That's more poetry than science.
I mean, maybe it's nostalgia or whatever, but ultimately, the science of it, it's going to... exponentially move farther and farther away. And that's the young Earth theory of that, I think, is that the moon isn't super far away, so it couldn't have been millions and millions of years. You know what I mean?
Right, but the orbit of the moon is merely its constant velocity, which never changes. It's never changed. It's constant. Versus the gravitational pull of the Earth, which is pulling it from a straight line into a circle.
But you just said earlier that the polarity of the Earth has switched multiple times.
That's the magnetic polarity.
That, in effect, does affect the moon, in which case, just like the moon affects our tides, the Earth's polarity switching would affect the moon, in which case it's pushing it more outwards, and the sun's gravitational pull is still reacting on that.
And that would also cause it to be... I mean, well, with the pull switching back and forth, you would have the push, but then you'd also have the pull at some point, too. It's not a push every time.
It rotates around the equator, whether the poles switch.
But the Earth's on the axis, so the moon doesn't follow the direct equator axis.
Yes, it does. That's why we only have eclipses sometimes.
No.
Otherwise, we'd have literally an eclipse every month.
If that was the truth, then you wouldn't have 6 months of darkness in Alaska.
Here's another thing that could possibly give you a good idea of why we also think that what we know about the Earth isn't 100% true. So in 1942, there was a plane that crashed in the Arctic up in Greenland, I believe. And so it crashed. The people were saved. They went to go back and recover it. Only 5 years later, that plane was under 260 feet of ice. Now, normally before, we thought that if there was 260 feet of ice, that would take a very substantial amount of time, thousands upon thousands of years. But that plane was only there for just 50 years, and it was under 260 feet of ice. So that's why we kind of disprove being like, oh, if this is this much, then that means basically putting a date on something where it's at. Things can go into places where the dates don't make sense.
Right. As far as ice goes, it's very inconsistent because of glaciers. You've got lots of motion, you've got weather, and then you've got the very level of carbon dioxide in the air itself that alters everything, including snowfall, precipitation, ice buildup, and even the radioactive decay that they use for carbon dating alters depending on how the carbon is in the air at that point.
Well, and then also because of that, I mean, we're also talking, the ocean shift. Just like we talked earlier about mountains raising, but San Andreas Fault. You have faults, you have mountains, you have peaks, you have ebbs and flows. And like if you look at old world and stuff like that, you're Pangea and stuff like that. But the oceans have risen, things have changed enough that it's moved around. So maybe one thing gets buried, and like Nep says, underwater, if you put something in the ocean, the salt water and everything, it'll age way quicker. So maybe something like that happens where it develops those layers of the crust. But maybe the Earth isn't as old as that. It just seems like that. But the passage of time is kind of slow during one human's life that they can't see the bigger picture.
Well, for the most part, whether the layer was affected by being submerged or not, that is something they can tell. They can tell whether this was altered because of water or not. That's one of the easy ones. The air is the tricky part, because the air changes everything. Carbon-14 is basically their favorite for carbon dating. It's only good for up to 10,000 years.
I mean, no, I'm with you. That's my biggest thoughts when it comes to Earth age is I always find myself coming back to the carbon dating because it's not infallible, and that's a lot of the basis for time recreation and understanding. And fossilization, we've proven can happen also instantly, not over millions of years.
Well, okay, I've got two sides of an argument about that, because carbon-14 is a radioactive isotope that decays after such a period of time, and we know that there's some give or take, but that's not the only thing. There are certain lakes that have been around for 1,000 years plus, and they can see physical, like since recorded history, they can see what has happened, like the plane that was buried way faster than they thought, and so they have to start readjusting their thoughts. But they have used physical evidence from within recorded history to compare to the decay of the carbon-14 so that they can get a good date. The only variable is 10,000 years ago. If there wasn't so much carbon dioxide in the air, that changes the time. But recently, they have found dinosaur bones with carbon-14 in the bone. And that's an argument for the other side, for the young Earth. Because if carbon-14 was in the bone, it means that bone can't be older than 10,000 years. And if it's in a Triceratops bone, that blows us out of the water. There's the argument whether this is going to start being the case the more bones we find, or if this was isolated incidents.
Well, no, we've already got surface bones. We're digging deeper now, and I mean,
There's also bones that have actual flesh on them still.
yeah, that's what I'm saying. If it's hermetically sealed somehow, the dating could be all wrong. Like they found a mummy in some like Aztec pyramid that was supposedly over 13,000 years old when it shouldn't have been, because Aztecs didn't live that long. But you're finding something in a sealed tomb where elements don't affect it as other things, so you got that outstander from the norm.
That's basically why they were trying to use radioactive isotopes to begin with, because no amount of containment is going to stop that other than a sheer wall of lead.
Well, that we know of. I mean,
that we know of, and we know of this stuff.
Well, ancient architects, that's what the aliens are.
Yeah, I mean, unless we have alien intervention.
Everything we know is as we know of. I mean, that until you learn something new.
That's the funny thing. People can think that they learned something new because there's so much data to back it up. But who's to say that's even right? So we're building conclusions on conclusions that might not even be right.
Yeah.
You can get to that point. A lot of scientists will always recommend that if you're going off of someone else's data, recreate that data first before you start making conclusions based on it. And a good scientist would, and a cheap commercial scientist won't.
That's a sad state of affairs.
But as far as young earthers go, a lot of them have the scientific knowledge, have the scientific training. They have come to a different conclusion than the old earthers, because certain aspects of this experiment that they're supposed to recreate before building, they have recreated and found different results.
The implications of it being proven 100% right for humanity, either one way or the other, would...
I don't think if we found out tomorrow which side was right, for sure,
really it wouldn't have any effect on it.
I don't think it would have any effect. First of all, I think people would still argue about it.
You're not right.
Even though we knew for a fact now, finally.
Yeah.
Say we found out for sure the Earth is actually 4,892 years old. We found its birth certificate. and they'll say, it was forged. This data was corrupt. I think there will always be the debate, and so life for us generally won't change. So... I don't know.
I think governmental implication of knowledge and education would take a huge, big shift in argument with textbooks and information and how evolution is put forth as the number one, no matter what you say, kind of belief system.
No, I think it would change textbooks. It would change a lot of things, because then you have to put into perspective. We thought this was 2 million years old. We found the world is only 4,000 years old. How long was this really? You know what I mean? Like it's going to change the way that people, like geologists, look at this silt buildup and all that kind of stuff. You know what I mean?
One way or another, we will find out. That's for sure. It will take a long time, depending on what the real answer is. But we have recorded history now. We've got over 3,000 years of recorded history, and as that grows,
that's true.
We will be able to start really knowing.
And our data storage is very vulnerable of how we store things now. One EM pulse in an archive, it's all gone. If those things weren't backed up in other locations, that information is gone, aside from the people that have already written it down somewhere or know it firsthand.
But there is that. That's the thing. Is right now our universe of information is built on redundancy because everyone's worried about that, and we have backups. There are paper archives for a huge percentage of knowledge out there. I think the only thing we're going to lose is Twitter, and that's not a big problem.
Right. I mean, no, I kind of see what Pota's talking about. Like, history is written by the victors. You know what I mean? So people could have found out things. There could have been knowledge, and that could have been fudged or changed by some invader over our times of...
That's another topic.
Well, we've already touched on this on a different topic, yeah. But, I mean, we're a nation of amnesia. I mean, a world of amnesia. Like, there's so much knowledge that has been lost because it is vulnerable to tampering.
Yeah, but the information that isn't lost is what we're going to be able to build off of. And as long as we can maintain what we've already got, even if, say, from today, we're no longer allowed to record history, the information that we've got will continue to get older and older, and we will be able to compare it in the future. We will have more years between us and them, so we will have a much better gauge at how the world is working.
Well, but memory is also fallible. So as time goes on, and it's the grandpa reciting to the young kid, "Oh yes, I remember 2020. Cities were ablaze. It was Armageddon." You know what I mean? Like,
someday we're going to invent a way to write words down, and then they won't change.
I mean, that's what I'm saying, though. And
I agree with you to a point. I mean, memory is fallible, and back then especially. But as we become an age of recording and an age of backups and correlation, the world has gotten small enough that we can all talk to each other about it. Once we get the information down, we don't lose that. It's not going to, you write the word orange down, it doesn't eventually become purple when you come back to look at it.
Unless you write the word orange down and Charlie Go Lucky comes around after you and changes orange to purple. Then it's purple for the rest of however fucking long. You see what I'm saying?
Now I see your point.
Yeah.
Yeah. And okay, so with young Earth, if it being a plausibility, the dragons that existed back in the day really did exist, and we hunted them to extinction because it was depending on the continent and the cultural reference of what dragons were, we killed them off.
As fun as it is to talk about dragons, it doesn't matter whether the Earth was young or old. We could have done that 5,000 years ago. We could have done that 2,000 years ago.
Exactly. That's the thing. None of us in our lifespans, our own personal lives, or even those of our grandparents, we don't know. And if we do hear something from our grandparents, they're the old coot sitting on the porch waving their cane at the kids on the lawn. "Get out of here. I remember when scooters flew in the air." Like, you know what I mean? Like...
I just meant young Earth gives more probability to the idea of large monsters that would be considered prehistoric sizes existing more recently in the past than believed before.
Well, how so? I think there's no dispute that creatures of that size existed anyway.
Yeah, I'm saying lived longer than we thought. Taking the actual numbers and date and time out, like millions of years, thousands of years, they existed more recently in human history than previously thought.
See, now there's the one thing that young Earthers and old Earthers agree on, and that's regardless of how long it took for things to happen, the order that things happened, it remains the same. We all know that the dinosaurs did not live on Earth at the same time as man and even as primates. That even if we're only talking hundreds of years, if the whole world was a decade, they died at year 8 and man was born at year 9.
But that also lends to that fallibility of the, like we're talking about time and stuff like that. We know that there was no man here because of carbon dating.
No, because of layering. Because down so far, no evidence of humans existed at all.
But if you're closer to a fault line, or they got pushed up towards mountainous, you know what I mean? Where others were leading towards
The layers are still there. Whether they get pushed up or not, they're recognizable as not being level anymore. So, regardless of the age of the Earth, even young Earth, everyone agrees that the dinosaurs did not walk with man on Earth. It happened one and then the other.
Wow.
Whether or not the first one was Adam or a monkey.
Infallible data, that's what I'm getting at. That's hearsay. Did you do the research? Have you dug in the dirt, Lee? Did you commentate it yourself? I mean, that's what I'm saying. It's like history could be, what if one, scientist dude was like, oh shit, this Cro-Magnon, yeah, he was totally riding a velociraptor. But he was like, no, don't worry, anybody. There was never any humans with dinosaurs, that's for sure.
Well, if we went to that level of cynicism where we couldn't even believe what other people have written, then there is no point in scientific research on history, or even believing that, saying, well, if everyone in the past was lying, now we can't trust science or the Bible, and neither one's right, and we've got nothing to go off of, and we're all just a bunch of goobers staring at the ceiling with glossy eyes.
Well, just thinking about time itself is fun, interesting, and mind-numbing at the same time. Scientists agree our sun will explode at some point in time. Now, I don't know if we 100% know how old it is at this time, because the young Earth theory could make that a good thing or a bad thing and not be so afraid of it. It's like, well, the Earth is this young. That means the sun has this much more time. It's like, well, how long was the sun around before the Earth was formed, though? Because we know,
we know presumptions. The Big Bang Theory is a theory. We know what we presume to know is ultimately what I'm getting at. And if we base current science off of previous science without doing due process, like Lee mentioned, then, we're pretty much building a house of cards. We're putting our house on sand, fellas. So it's odd. It's very interesting. I think I'm going to wrap up this episode. Let's get some final thoughts on, young Earth. Poda, what do you believe, and what is your conjecture out of all this?
Never having actually looked into the theory myself, just heard people talk about it in the wings. I'll probably look into it a little bit more now. But yes, I do believe the Earth has been around for a time, for an age, and I was not around the entire time. I'm here finite at the time of it. It could end today, it could end tomorrow. I find it fascinating to theorize and find facts of trying to calculate the actual age, because I think that'd be beneficial to humanity as a whole for knowledge gain, and to kind of steer fear from the end, because if we all agree there's a beginning and an end to everything, so what stage of that distance are we in right now?
Mm-hmm. Nep, do you have anything to close that on?
I am one of the people that believe that the Earth is young. I believe that there's a lot of things that we can't explain. There's a lot of things that we need to figure out, but I truly believe that the Earth isn't billions of years old, but that's my opinion.
All right. Lee, would you like to close out?
I am more of the opinion of an old Earth, but I have been listening to the arguments on both sides, and it's very interesting. Both sides have very compelling arguments, and I have a pursuit for the truth. So I'm not going to say that old Earth is right, especially not at this junction when I'm still learning more and more about what people have found. And like you said, I'm not the one digging in the dirt. I'm not the one finding this stuff out firsthand. But even though I lean towards old Earth, I'm willing, to hear it out if there's compelling evidence to show, otherwise. And I believe that this argument can be separate from religion anyway.
Yeah.
There can be the young Earth with a rapid evolution. There could be an old Earth with creation. It can go either way, and so I don't have to feel afraid or trepidatious, religiously to consider all the options. But scientifically speaking, if either one is possible, I would be very much interested to find out.
I quite agree with that. My own personal thoughts, I believe the Earth could be billions of years old, but if you do look at certain things, like, the moon's distance from the Earth and the change of gravitational fields, and reminiscing as a young boy and thinking the moon was bigger than it was. Obviously, it was smaller, so there is a weird part of that. Talking about evolution, we see evolutionary traits very quickly in a lot of things, depending on breeding, and that's a big part of this as well. And in the short time, you could look at pictures of dogs from like the 20s, and it's supposed to be the same breed, and they look way different now. That is just like kind of a glimpse into a quick evolutionary thing, like you were saying. Ultimately, whether or not the world is 8 billion years old or it's 8,000 years old, I'm 35 years old, born in 1985, so it really doesn't matter that much to me. But speculating and conversation is stimulating and fantastic, and I would like to thank you all for joining me.
Thank you for joining us today. If you have any thoughts or questions on today's topic, please leave a comment. Or if you want to contact us directly with any thoughts or ideas for future episodes, you can directly email us at ratingthefringe@brainforger.com. Be sure to like, follow, and or subscribe for future episodes on Facebook, Spotify, Libsyn, or most podcast suppliers. We'll see you next time as we raid the Fringe.